A diamond is nothing but carbon, ordinary, fragile, until it's crushed by unimaginable pressure. Only then does it become unbreakable. What if your soul works the same way? What if every heartbreak, every betrayal, every trauma wasn't evidence of weakness, but the very pressure shaping you into something indestructible? It's a disturbing thought, isn't it, that the pain you've begged to escape might actually be the forge of your strength. And yet, this is exactly what Carl Jung's psychology reveals through shadow work. The wound is not the enemy, it's the gateway. Society insists that survival comes from shutting down, from being tough enough to feel nothing. But here's the paradox. Numbness is not strength, it's decay. True strength is the empath's ability to feel everything deeply and still rise. The world may call it fragility, but in truth, it's power disguised. Signs you are an empath, absorbing others' emotions, sensing what no one else sees, are not defects. They are the very proof that your soul is tuned to a frequency most people will never hear. Think of your shadows, the shame, the silence, the unresolved trauma. They are not chains to keep you bound. They are maps, leading you into the parts of yourself that have been waiting to be reclaimed. Shadow work in Jungian psychology is nothing less than soul alchemy, transforming lead into gold, wounds into wisdom, vulnerability into unshakable power. And as strange as it sounds, once you begin, the universe conspires to guide you. Dreams, synchronicities, unexpected voices. They stop feeling random and start looking like a hidden compass. Here's the truth. You are not broken. You are becoming. And what you make of your pain will determine whether you stay a prisoner of the past or rise as an unbreakable empath. This isn't just self-help. It's survival, individuation, and freedom. And if you stay with me, I'll show you how Carl Jung's shadow work doesn't just heal, it transforms. It often begins quietly, in childhood, when the empath first notices that they feel things more deeply than those around them. While other kids shrug off harsh words, the empath takes them home, replaying them like a scratched record in their unconscious mind. This hypersensitivity can look like fragility, but in truth, it's the first sign you are an empath. The inner child and empaths are tightly woven together, because what was once dismissed as being too emotional was actually the seed of an extraordinary gift. Carl Jung would say that what gets buried in those early years never really disappears. It sinks into the collective unconscious, waiting to resurface. Now picture a child who hears arguments at home. For many, it's noise. For an empath, it's an earthquake. That child doesn't just hear the shouting. They absorb the fear, the sadness, the unspoken words. Trauma and empathy get linked early, creating a fragile shell that shapes how they see the world. Later in life, when they take an empath test online, they recognize themselves instantly, as if the questions were written straight out of their diary. They realize that their pain wasn't random. It was a curriculum written in invisible ink, designed to train their sensitivity. The wounded empath often becomes the family peacekeeper. They smooth conflicts, anticipate moods, even at their own expense. While others chase independence, empaths learn survival through emotional management. It's the hidden burden of carrying adult problems with a child's shoulders. And yet, as Jungian psychology reminds us, the shadow formed here is not an enemy. It is an archive of forgotten feelings, waiting to be reclaimed. This is why shadow work feels like reopening an old wound. Because it is. But only by reopening can true healing for empaths begin. Think of it like a mirror with a crack. No matter how much you try to ignore it, the crack distorts every reflection. The empath psychology is shaped by these fractures, and they start to ask, why do I attract toxic people? Why do I feel drained after every argument? The answers don't lie in avoiding the mirror, but in understanding it. Analytical psychology teaches us that the unconscious mind records every injury, every silence, every broken promise. And in those recordings are clues, waiting for the day the empath dares to face them again. And so the empath grows, half wounded, half wise, sensing both the beauty and the danger of their sensitivity. They may not yet know how to deal with toxic people, but they instinctively sense when a boundary is crossed. They may not yet have language for emotional boundaries, but they feel when their soul is leaking energy. That's why the empath healing journey doesn't begin with answers. It begins with questions. Questions like, what if my pain isn't a weakness? What if it's the compass pointing toward the work I was meant to do? And that, of course, leads to the next step, peering into the shadows within. Carl Jung often said that everyone carries a shadow, and for the empath, that shadow feels heavier than most. Imagine being a sponge in a world of spilled emotions, absorbing not only your own pain but also the hidden despair of others. This is where empath psychology intersects with Jungian psychology, the realization that the unconscious mind doesn't just hold personal wounds, but also fragments of the collective unconscious. An empath lives at the border between two worlds, constantly negotiating between what is theirs and what belongs to others. No wonder shadow work feels like navigating a labyrinth. The shadow, in Jung's terms, is not evil, it's repressed. It's the collection of everything denied, ignored, or judged as unacceptable. For empaths, this shadow is amplified because they internalize not only their own shame but also the guilt and anger of the people around them. A simple conflict at work can feel like carrying the weight of the entire office. A fight with a friend can feel like a storm echoing in their chest. Signs you are an empath often emerge in these very moments, when you notice that you suffer more for others' wounds than they do themselves. Shadow work is the key to untangling this knot. Analytical psychology teaches that the empath must face the shadow, not to destroy it but to befriend it. Picture writing down every recurring dream, every strange synchronicity, and asking, what is the hidden message here? For some, it feels like speaking with their inner child, who was silenced too soon. For others, it means realizing that trauma and empathy are two sides of the same coin. The very thing that hurt them also sharpened their ability to sense truth in others. This realization alone can be life-changing. Here's where things get practical. If you want to start healing for empaths through shadow work, begin with small rituals that grow in power with consistency. First, journaling. Write down one moment each day when you felt emotions that might not have been yours. Short-term benefit, immediate relief and clarity. Long-term, a map of emotional patterns that reveals how much of your energy goes to carrying other people's weight. Second, dream journaling. Record dreams and symbols, even the confusing ones. Short-term benefit, curiosity and awareness. Long-term, recognition of synchronicity that shows you how your unconscious mind is guiding your growth. Third, boundary practice. Say no once a day in small ways, like declining a call when you're too tired. Short-term benefit, less exhaustion. Long-term, building emotional boundaries so strong they become second nature. But let's be honest, these exercises aren't easy. The empath will feel guilty when they say no, restless when they sit in silence, even doubtful when they don't see immediate results. The unconscious mind resists being uncovered, like a closet packed with things we'd rather not face. Yet here lies the secret. Continuity is more powerful than intensity. Doing 10 minutes of journaling every night for 6 months is far more transformative than a single emotional breakthrough. Over time, this steady practice turns chaos into clarity. The empath begins to realize that shadow work is not about perfection, it's about persistence. And persistence is exactly what breaks the chains that keep them bound. When you cut your hand, you see the blood, you feel the sting, and you know instinctively it needs care. You wash it, you cover it, you watch it heal. But what about wounds no one can see? Emotional wounds don't bleed, yet they ache just as deeply, sometimes even more. For empaths, trauma often hides beneath the surface like an invisible scar, shaping how they breathe, love, and trust. The unconscious mind records these injuries the same way the body remembers pain. Only difference is, while a broken bone forces you to rest, a broken soul tries to keep going, pretending nothing happened. This is why empaths often move through life carrying wounds that never received proper care. They might hear, "You're too sensitive," or "Get over it," as if feelings could be stitched shut with willpower alone. Each dismissal adds another link to the chain. These chains are subtler than broken bones, but just as limiting. They keep empaths tied to old stories, replaying the same patterns of giving too much and receiving too little. Carl Jung would say these unhealed wounds sink into the shadow, quietly dictating behaviors until they are finally brought into the light of awareness. Imagine a friendship where one person constantly takes and the other constantly gives. At first, it feels noble, even spiritual, but slowly the empath notices exhaustion creeping in like fog. That's one of the signs you are an empath. You carry others' burdens until your knees give out. Analytical psychology shows that these patterns repeat because the inner child and empaths are linked. The child still seeks approval while the adult longs for freedom. Recognizing the chain is the first step to breaking it. Without recognition, the cycle continues like an untreated infection, spreading silently. But recognition alone isn't enough. Healing for empaths requires active strategy. One method is to create an inventory of draining relationships. Write down names. Notice the physical reaction in your body as you do. If your chest tightens, that's the unconscious mind signaling that something's wrong. Short term, this practice clarifies where your energy leaks. Long term, it gives you the courage to reframe boundaries, even if that means walking away. This is not cruelty, it is individuation, the process Jung described as becoming whole. The chain of people-pleasing breaks when you realize your worth is not tied to how much pain you absorb for others. Another strategy is emotional boundaries training. Start small, like limiting how long you engage in conversations that spiral into negativity. Short term, you'll notice less fatigue. Long term, you'll reprogram your nervous system to recognize when empathy turns into self-sabotage. This is why shadow work is so crucial. It helps empaths see that their kindness sometimes masks fear of abandonment. Once that mask drops, they can transform trauma into wisdom. And though toxic people may resist these changes, synchronicity begins to affirm them with unexpected signs of support. There comes a moment when the empath, once defined by wounds, begins to sense a shift. It's like standing at the edge of a storm and noticing the first break of sunlight piercing through. After years of feeling chained by trauma and empathy, something inside whispers, "You've carried enough." This is the turning point where shadow work pays off, where the lessons of Carl Jung's psychology begin to crystallize into lived experience. The empath realizes they were never fragile glass, they were molten steel, being forged all along. In Jungian psychology, this stage is known as individuation, the process of integrating shadow and light into a whole self. For the empath, individuation feels like reclaiming lost territory. Emotional boundaries no longer feel like walls of defense, but like sacred gates of choice. They learn that saying no is not rejection, it's respect. They discover that caring for others does not mean abandoning themselves. This balance transforms their identity from victim to warrior, from wounded to unbreakable. And suddenly, they see signs you are an empath not as burdens but as badges of strength. We can see this transformation embodied in public figures. Take Brené Brown, for instance, whose groundbreaking research on vulnerability revealed that true strength comes from embracing what we fear most. She turned shame, a shadow few dare to confront, into a universal language of courage and connection. Or consider Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Despite struggling with depression and personal loss early in life, he transformed pain into purpose. His openness about mental health and his relentless drive show how the empath healing journey can create not only personal resilience, but also inspiration for millions. Both remind us that individuation isn't theory, it's life in action. The rise is not loud, it's steady. Picture an empath who once felt drained after every conversation with toxic people. Now, through healing practices and stronger emotional boundaries, they leave such encounters lighter because they know how to filter what belongs to them and what doesn't. This filtering is not cold detachment. It's wisdom born of shadow work. They understand that trauma once cracked their foundation, but individuation has rebuilt it stronger. The unconscious mind, once a haunting echo, becomes a guide, revealing synchronicity as a constant reminder you are on the right path. And so the unbreakable empath emerges, not as someone who no longer feels pain, but as someone who transforms pain into power. They stand taller, not because life is easier, but because they've learned how to meet it with courage. They carry their inner child not as a wounded fragment, but as a source of innocence and wisdom combined. And in this state, every act of kindness, every emotional boundary, every moment of clarity is a declaration, I am whole. This is not the end of their journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where daily empowerment becomes the natural rhythm of life. Living beyond the shadow means choosing, every single day, how to respond to what life has done to you. Jean-Paul Sartre captured it perfectly. The important thing is not what they make of us, but what we make of what they made of us. For the empath, this becomes a call to action. Trauma and empathy may have shaped their story, but they are not condemned to repeat it. Healing for empaths is less about chasing perfection and more about practicing freedom, deciding how to live despite the scars. One way this shows up is through conscious choices in relationships. Instead of letting toxic people drain them, the unbreakable empath learns to recognize red flags early and walk away with dignity. In the short term, this feels uncomfortable, even rebellious. In the long term, it builds a life surrounded by reciprocity and respect. This is the essence of emotional boundaries, not walls of isolation, but doors the empath chooses when and how to open. Each choice is a declaration. I will not be defined by what hurt me. Empowerment also means reimagining purpose. Many empaths discover that their wounds gave them the ability to comfort, guide, or inspire others. Think of Brené Brown transforming shame into research that heals millions, or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson turning depression into discipline and inspiration. In the short term, using pain as purpose gives meaning to suffering. In the long term, it transforms trauma into legacy. The empath no longer asks, "Why me?" but instead, "What can grow from me?" That shift is the heart of individuation. Daily empowerment can also be about reclaiming joy. Simple choices, like pursuing a hobby without guilt, laughing even in heaviness, or allowing rest without apology, become acts of resistance against a world that once silenced their needs. This may seem small, but in analytical psychology, these micro-decisions reshape the unconscious mind. Short-term, they offer relief. Long-term, they rewrite identity. The empath realizes that healing is not only about reducing pain, but about expanding life. And here's the paradox. The more the empath embraces freedom, the more synchronicity aligns with their steps. Doors open, people arrive, opportunities appear, not because life suddenly became easy, but because the empath finally stopped living as a prisoner of their past. They live beyond the shadow, carrying scars not as proof of defeat but as signatures of resilience. This is where the empath, unbreakable and awake, begins not just to survive but to thrive. And yet, even here, the journey whispers of more layers to unfold. They say diamonds are unbreakable, but so are souls that decide to rise from the ruins. Think of Viktor Frankl, who endured the concentration camps and still wrote that life is never without meaning. His testimony proves what Carl Jung taught. The unconscious mind holds not only darkness but also a reservoir of strength waiting to be tapped. For the empath, this is more than theory, it's survival. Trauma and empathy are intertwined, but healing for empaths is the proof that pain can be shaped into purpose. Modern studies in psychology back this up. Research on post-traumatic growth shows that many individuals report higher levels of resilience, empathy, and spiritual awareness after enduring suffering. In other words, the very thing that tried to break you may end up expanding you. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "The important thing is not what they make of us, but what we make of what they made of us." This echoes perfectly for empaths. You didn't choose the chaos you absorbed as a child, but you do choose whether those memories become prisons or stepping stones. Short term, this choice feels uncomfortable. Breaking chains always does. Long term, it becomes liberation. You shift from asking, "Why did this happen to me?" to "What will I create because this happened?" That shift alone marks the rise of the unbreakable empath. Take Brené Brown's research on vulnerability. She found that people who live with courage don't deny shame, they expose it. They practice what Jung called shadow work, even if they never use the term. The result? Greater authenticity, deeper connection, and less fear of judgment. For the empath, this means that allowing yourself to be seen, messy, sensitive, imperfect, isn't weakness. It's proof of power. Look also at studies on relationships. Psychologists like John Gottman have shown that empathy is one of the strongest predictors of marital success and relational stability. But here's the catch: empathy without boundaries burns out. Healing for empaths requires balance, knowing when to listen and when to step back. That's the difference between surviving relationships and thriving in them. Even in leadership, empath psychology is transforming the world. Research at Harvard Business Review points out that empathetic leaders foster higher engagement, creativity, and trust. Yet those same leaders must master individuation, the courage to balance compassion with clear decision-making. Learning how to deal with toxic people and set boundaries isn't selfish. It's the training ground for becoming a leader who changes the collective unconscious of organizations. Philosophers have always wrestled with the tension between suffering and freedom. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." For the empath, the why often emerges from the very wounds they've endured. Shadow work gives those wounds a voice, turning chaos into clarity. And synchronicity confirms the process by placing the right insight at the right moment, as if life itself were conspiring to remind you, keep going. Consider also creativity as therapy. Studies show that art, music, and writing reduce stress and improve resilience. For empaths, creativity is not just expression, it's exorcism. It externalizes what was trapped inside, giving the shadow shape and therefore less power. Short term, it's release. Long term, it's integration. Whether it's journaling dreams, painting emotions, or composing music, each act of creation tells the unconscious mind, "I see you. You no longer control me." That is shadow work in motion. Spirituality plays a role too. While Jung wasn't religious in the traditional sense, he spoke of the collective unconscious as a spiritual dimension of human life. Modern psychology recognizes that practices like gratitude and mindfulness increase overall well-being. For empaths, these practices reconnect them with something larger than themselves. Trauma isolates, spirituality reunites, and synchronicity becomes the thread tying personal healing to a cosmic rhythm. Short term, it gives peace. Long term, it gives purpose. Let's not forget the body. Trauma doesn't just haunt thoughts, it lives in the nervous system. Somatic therapies show that movement, breathing, and grounding exercises release stored stress. For the empath, learning to reconnect with the body is essential. Dancing, stretching, walking in nature, all simple acts that whisper, "You are safe now." Short term, they calm anxiety. Long term, they rewire safety into the body itself, so empathy no longer feels like drowning but like flowing. And what about community? Studies on resilience show that people heal faster in supportive groups. The empath often isolates, believing no one could understand their depth. But healing accelerates when they share with others who walk a similar path. Whether through therapy, support circles, or even safe online spaces, the empath learns they are not alone. The collective unconscious speaks louder in community. Here's the challenge. Will you let your story remain a tragedy, or will you rewrite it as a testimony? Sartre, Frankl, Jung, Brown all point to the same truth. Freedom is found not in denying suffering, but in choosing what to do with it. You can keep carrying wounds as chains, or you can recast them as the pressure that forged you into diamond. Every choice, every boundary, every act of courage is evidence of the empath's unstoppable rise. So let me ask you, which shadow are you still running from? Which boundary have you been too afraid to set? Which dream keeps knocking at the door of your unconscious mind, asking to be acknowledged? Don't let these questions drift by. Let them pierce you. And finally, if this message has stirred something inside you, don't keep it locked away. Apply it, live it, and share it. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep walking this path with me. Because every time we rise together, we confirm what Jung, Sartre, and Frankl all knew. The human spirit, once awakened, is truly unbreakable.